The curious case of Jorge Masvidal. So, Masvidal has unretired. And it's a very interesting position. It's an interesting position because nobody is ever going to fight in that octagon that's playing checkers. And there's not a lot of people that understand the industry, but Jorge Masvidal would definitely qualify as the other side of the table. He would qualify as soon as he got into promoting himself. As soon as he started signing the front of checks instead of just the back of checks, he goes into a different category of other fighters. So what is he doing? What are we not seeing here? Under Usada days, by example, the word retire meant something very different than it ever did at other times. One of the identifiable words, like retirement is just a word. In the most part, it's just a word, right? Well, that's true in the fight game. You retire just so you can unretire, right? You can't have the comeback fight until you have the retirement fight. It's all part of the process. But with Usada, it was very relevant because they identified the word. And they identified what a retired fighter or an unretired fighter would look like as it pertained to their proceedings. Usada's gone. That's the only reason I bring that up. Jorge Masvidal announced his return to fighting 2 days after the execution of Usada. And under the new testing agent, that word isn't quite as relevant. So why did Jorge say it? And if Jorge was just looking to fight, I mean, if there was ever a retirement that was insincere, it was Jorge Masvidal's. He did not want to go. I mean, Jorge had his fingers were crossed and in his pocket. And I kind of felt for him a little bit because there's some guys that fight and then there's fighters. And Jorge Masvidal is a fighter, make no mistake. You want to put a couple of $1 million out there, great, he'll show up. But you want to put a cheeseburger out there, he'll show up. That's not tough guy talk by me. I have proof of it. I have multi-millions of dollars proof that I can supply a video of. It was Masvidal versus Usman Part 1. It was done on about 7 days' notice. That would be the biggest fight of his life, and he won the BMF title at the Mecca Madison Square Garden. I don't think anything could trump the night that he went out and did Masvidal on very short notice. Now, I can also show you tangible evidence of him leaving a fast food restaurant to go to somebody's backyard, not knowing if that was going to be videoed or not, having no idea that that would be videoed and placed on something called the internet and lived to this day on something called YouTube. He just went out and did it. I mean, right, there's guys that fight and then there's fighters. But why did he announce his unretirement? Why did he announce that he's coming back? He's got a promotion. He could go fight in it. Dave Feldman has all but publicly offered him Mike Perry. Well, Mike Perry, the champion of Feldman's promotion, has offered him the fight. Is that what he's leading into? Why did he announce that he's unretired? And when I come back and I tell you that nobody's going to fight in that octagon that's playing checkers, to explain what I mean, and most guys don't understand this concept, but each night has to have a value and it has to have a meaning. Each and every fight has to have a significance. Reed Harris explained this to me. I was one of Reed's fighters. I was in the WEC. It was 2008. And WEC was not yet, it might have been 2007. WEC was not yet purchased by Zuffa, who was the parent company of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. That deal wasn't done yet. So everybody's in competition with Dana. And Reed Harris is a promoter, he's an owner of a company. And he told me something very flattering about Dana. He didn't put him down at all. He said, you know what that guy does that he does so well? He puts on significant fights. I didn't know what it meant. I was a younger guy myself. I was 20, 26, 27, 28 years. I was somewhere a little bit younger myself. I didn't really know what it meant. I had to think about that. And Reed said, yeah, nobody else can do what he does because nobody has the ability to put on significant fights. I thought, what the hell kind of word is that? I mean, I heard of main events. I heard of title fights. I heard of grudge fight. What the hell is Reed Harris telling me about significant fights? But I played with it, right? I kept thinking about what he meant. until I figured it out. And it's not as though this is a colossal riddle. I just hadn't heard that term before for fights. And what Rita's talking about is that each fight has a meaning. And if the fight ends that night, whether the gloves get set down or whether the contracts expire, if there's nowhere to go, if two guys go out there and fight, and regardless of outcome doesn't affect a fight in the future, that fight then doesn't have significance. So, very few guys understand this principle. I would just think that Masvidal would. Like, here, let me give you a great one. Guys are going to have a retirement fight. And the biggest mistake you can ever do is to announce that my next one is my last one prior to getting the bout agreement. If you ever say my next one's my last one, if you ever say my next one is my retirement fight, if you ever have any version of that, you can be as sure as night follows day. When the offer and your next opponent comes over, it's going to be the hardest offer and hardest night of your life. But a general rule in a sport, and it should be that way, is nobody leaves here with the shine. You pass the torch before you go. And that is a rule, but very few guys want to follow it. And very few guys are good enough to do it, by the way. Right? If your name isn't St. Pierre, your name isn't Khabib, you didn't go out on top. Very few guys are good enough to do it, but the suckers will always say, the next one is my last one. And they will then receive a bout agreement for a very unfavorable match. I don't know that there's an exception to that. I mean, if you want to get really literal, the only exception that I'm aware of is Mark Munoz. Mark Munoz is the only guy who said this next one's my last one, win, lose, or draw, and was able to get his hand raised. If anybody else won on their last night, it was not on purpose. They weren't supposed to, right? But I bring that to you because Masvidal would know that. And those guys that come out and say the next one is my last one. The guys that do that, the same ways they get dealt from the bottom of the deck. If a guy was announcing his unretirement but didn't have a match to walk back into, you're now asking a promoter to start over from square one. And the promoter is going to play you nonstop. There's nothing against you playing him. This is what the game is. The audience is going to play you for a sucker every chance they get. They're going to come, they're going to shake your hand. They're going to, oh, can I get a selfie and pull it out? When they get home, they're going to log onto the underground forum and talk about what a POS you are and that you tried to grab their wife's butt when you're doing a pic. They'll do it. It's the exact same guy. They're all playing one another. Masvidal knows these things. Masvidal knows that he would have been a lot smarter to come out and say that the judge did a backroom deal and signed him to a gag order, and he can't say any more than that, but he and Colby are, in fact, going to fight a second time. He'd have been way, way smarter to do that. And say, but before I get in there with Colby, per the court order of the judge on a gag order that I'm not even allowed to speak about, I have to go do 3 rounds with Ian Gary. All of a sudden, he would have been telling a story, and it would have had a significance. But if you don't do those things, then you're asking a promoter to start at square one. Okay, it's this guy versus this guy. Well, what are the rules? Unified. Well, what is the weight class? I don't know. What do you think? 170, 155? What difference does it make? Well, where are we going to be on the card? Well, you're probably not in shape to go 5 rounds since you've been retired a while. How does 5th from the top sound? Right? You start working in reverse order. And that's a mistake that guys will make all the time. There's always a sucker that's going to say, my next one is my last one, but not the smart guy. And George would qualify as the smart guy, but George can't fight in the octagon if it doesn't have a significance. As big of a fight as George versus Gaethje for the BMF would be, the BMF is a dead-end road. The BMF has no lineage, and the BMF has never been defeated, and the BMF will take you nowhere. So it would qualify. The only thing that we ever do in this sport that is checkers, the only thing we ever do in this sport that does not have a lineage, does not have a contendership, isn't contended himself, is the BMF. Now, I'm not predicting it for you at all. But I am very surprised that George would announce his return, of which is never going to happen in the octagon unless he's got a minimum of 2. If he has a story to tell and he's got 2 guys try this all the time with the UFC. backdoor stories that you guys have never heard. Your biggest stars, your favorite fighters, your favorite fighter's favorite fighter, all the time will call the UFC and say, I will do this. Let's start negotiating. And the reason that gets told no every single time, the UFC is not looking for a story. The UFC is looking for stories. Gotta be at least two. And in the theme of having at least two, as it pertains to Masvidal, unretired, and the UFC, he's yet to tell us one. It's a very interesting spot. I don't know what to make of it. There'll be more to come. There'll be a tell at some point. He'll set something down. You all will miss it. I'll pick it up. It hasn't happened yet, but it's coming. And unless it comes in pairs or better, it's not coming to the octagon.